Welcome to this week's video, where this week I have a Mutt Fat Sabbath. Believe it or not, this little scrambler bike's just a 125, but it's very much about the looks with this bike. So everything's sort of as you'd expect control wise. Ignore that, that's just my holder. But yeah, as usual, simple controls on this. There's no sort of fancy rider modes as you'd sort of expect with this style of bike. So just everything is normal, so sort of horn, indicators, lights with a pass, obviously your clutch, then across the other side, accelerator, starter, kill switch, brake, front brake. Then your little speedo, that's quite cool, tiny speedo with a gear indicator, and there is a small fuel light down there and a sort of engine warning light. So at least it hasn't got a fuel gauge, but it's got a fuel light, so that's all cool. So what does it sound like? I'll demonstrate that now. So first impressions of this bike are really good. It feels a lot more planted than a normal 125, which I guess is down to the big chunky tyres, hence the name Fat Sabbath. The other reason it's called Sabbath, I'm guessing, is because of Black Sabbath. The whole lot is black. I think the only bit that's chrome is sort of a couple of these bolts and the front forks. Everything else is matte black. It looks really cool. You wouldn't think it was a 125, and as you can hear, it's pretty noisy, but that sort of adds to the character. I was very surprised at just how loud it was when I first started it up, but that's what this bike's all about. So from a practical point of view, then the seat's super big, super comfy, tank's quite nice, so it's very comfortable to ride. Nice and low seat as well. So it would suit any rider, and because it's a 125 it's really light, and even though it's got these sort of fat tyres, it still seems to handle alright. So you can feel those chunky treads, so it's a bit more effort needed to go into a corner to sort of get any lean, and they do take some getting used to compared to a normal road tyre, but everything works nicely. So it is a 125, so it's never going to pull your arms off performance wise, but that's actually quite fun. And these sorts of roads I'm on now, these small country roads, are perfectly suited to this bike. It's what it's about. You can have a nice little Sunday ride out without going at stupid speeds and still have loads of fun. Because it is just a 125 and you have to sort of rev it to get speed up, then the only negative comment I've got so far is that once you get sort of 50 mile an hour or high up in the revs, then there are some vibrations, but I guess that's to be expected from, I think the tyres are causing some of that, which are, as you've seen, they're fairly chunky. They're a really big blocky tread pattern. At low speeds you can actually feel that. So if you're rolling along in traffic at 5 miles an hour, you can actually feel the blocks. It sort of bounces a bit up. I found the bike a very easy bike to ride. So as you can see, it changes directions fairly quickly. You can feel those tyres, of course. Mirrors are really good, so I'm not getting much shoulder in those, giving me a good view. They match the rest of the bike nicely too. What else? All the controls, I really like these grips here. They're quite a cool thing, and again everything's sort of black, so it works nicely. The bars are nice and wide, so it feels very stable. But yeah, the exhaust just sounds brilliant on these kinds of roads. Suspension wise, it's a little bit stiffer than I was expecting, to be honest, but you can adjust the sort of rear preload, but it's perfectly comfortable, and I think the big comfy seat helps in that respect as well. As you can see, it's for a 125, performance is fine, and this one, it's only done 42 kilometres, so it's not really running yet. The gearbox is nice. It's a 5-speed box on this. The clutch is fairly light, not as light as some 125s I've ridden, but I'm guessing it's a cable clutch, but it's absolutely fine, it's not a problem. Like I say, I've not had a missed gear yet, so the gearbox is working nicely. So the brakes on this bike, front disc, that works really, really well, and rear disc as well, which again is pretty good. And again, what you sort of find with especially rear brakes, they don't tend to be that strong. This one seems pretty good actually. So whilst we're stuck behind this tractor and a load of cars, let's talk about who I think this bike's aimed at. Obviously, with it being a 125, people's sort of first bikes, or people that want to try biking and get into it, but don't just want something boring, because it is very much about the sort of looks and cool factor of this bike, and it certainly ticks all those boxes. As demonstrated, it does make you a little bit childish though. But yes, I think if I was going back to having just a CBT and not a full licence, then something like this would be perfect. Like I say, it ticks the boxes of being easy to ride, it's nice and light. Also ticks the box for looking really good, it looks much better than a 125 should do. I think the other kind of person it would appeal to is someone that does want a sort of commuter bike, but doesn't want something that's boring. They also want something they can use at other times, so just a trip out, and weather like today is absolutely perfect, and these sorts of roads, when you're not stuck behind a tractor, are great for it as well. You don't need to have bags of power. So to my usual 3 favourite things about a bike. So on this bike, I think the number one thing are its looks. Obviously it looks a really cool scrambler style bike, much different to most 125s. The second thing is this exhaust. It's just comedy how loud it is. It really suits the bike, or the bike's personality. So it sounds way too good for a 125. And number 3 is just the general feel of the bike. It doesn't feel like you're riding a normal 125. It feels something special. It's tricky to sort of get across, but it's got that sort of special ingredient that makes a bike feel special. It feels well built and sort of planted as well. So they're my top 3 things. So on the negatives, then the only one that I've sort of come up with, I mentioned before that here I'm doing just under 50 miles an hour and it's perfectly decent and feels really nice. once you get over that, well, not so much now. There, sort of once you get over that, then there are some vibrations. You can feel that mainly through the foot pegs, a little bit through the handlebars, and a little bit through the seat. But it's nothing awful, but it is there. Obviously this bike's not really designed for sort of long distance touring and for speeds sort of up in the 60s and 70s, so it probably isn't a proper problem in the real world, but it's just something to be aware of. So obviously this isn't the ideal place for this kind of bike, but actually it holds its own. It's managing to keep up with traffic on sort of these faster dual carriageways. I think because it is loud as well, then you don't feel as exposed when cars are pulling on, and you can adjust your speed a little bit as well. So wind protection wise, then there isn't really any, but even so it still feels fine. You're never going to be going silly speeds anyway, but I'm right by Birmingham Airport here. It's really exposed. You can see there's some wind and you can feel the wind, but it's not blowing the bike about. So how much does this bike cost? It's £3,500, which, yes, for a 125 it's not cheap, but for this style of bike it is. So it's a toss-up between a style of bike and 125. What are you comparing against on what you think value wise? I think it's pretty good. I think, yes, you're going to pay a bit more for something of this style and this quality, really. So in summary, what do I think of the Mutt Motorcycles Fat Sabbath 125? I think it's a cracking little bike, is this. If I was in the market for a 125, this would definitely be on my list. I can't see many more bikes where you're getting this kind of look, feel and quality on a 125. The expense of a full license these days can really put people off, and I can see why. So maybe the answer is a CVT and a cool 125. Especially if you're going to be using it just as a bit of fun at weekends and for commuting, because again I think this would be a decent commuter bike. It's small and very manoeuvrable, so you could filter quite easily. It's very easy to sort of manage. It'd be decent on fuel with it being a 125. The whole running costs would be cheap because of cheap road tax, cheap fuel, only need to do your CVT and you're out on two wheels.